So after having reset the timer, because apparently I switched batteries, we're going to do the review for Rocky Mountain High. Luckily, this is about the drug trade and not the John Denver song, and well, could have been about the Columbine shooting with that title. Yeah, or some other, although to make it iconic, setting it in the Rockies, I don't know. Anyhow, instead, it's about pot, legalized pot sales. And to begin with, I had my fun with it, there's no question. However, it did kind of, there were times when keeping track of everything was getting too hard. Not so much the game state situation, I could catch that pretty easily, but just keeping track of all the different things that I had to do, especially on the chit pull cup. I guess let's hit components. Chits are great. Paper money, it's cool that it exists. I always think that a game kind of needs to come with money. I could have seen why this one, with its kind of, slim packaging and whatnot, didn't come with it. But, it's always nice to have the components that you need to play the game, right? But yeah, it's nothing to write home about. The board is on stock. It's fine for what it is. It doesn't pooch. It doesn't cause any problems. Same with these things. They're on stock. They have a backing on them showing the easy green picture. This thing contains some player aid information that's useful. The rules I found relatively clear. I think there were a couple of places where I had some minor issues where something wasn't absolutely certain, but it kind of didn't matter as long as you make a decision. And then we come to all the cards. So these were printed on stock. You have to cut them. And of course, I don't do a great job with that. But it's very cool. They have, the artwork is probably the most awesome thing about them. These are some advertisements. Some weed. We got security guards. We got lawyers. I don't know. They put a lot of effort into the artwork on this Blast City Games stuff. Anyway, it doesn't matter too much if you don't cut them perfectly. I ended up kind of screwing up a cut or two where I had to tape cards back together because of the way that they're just piled up on the board. A lot of them there's no differential between them. So like the workers, they're all exactly the same except for the artwork on them. And then you got a few smaller little markers that you use for various things, including the locations you have. I guess that's about it. The rules are semi-gloss. It's kind of a glossy paper. I didn't see if I had to write, I didn't have to write on it, so I don't know. I'm not a fan of glossy paper, but whatever, it's cheaper. So that's cool. What about the play of the game itself? So each player starts with a slightly each player starts with a slightly different starting situation. The person who goes first has a certain advantage to going first. just in terms of being able to fire off a turn earlier, set things up earlier that other people don't get a reaction to until it's their turn. But they have a penalty as well, which is you start with locations, which is an important facet of the game, in ascending order. So the first player gets location 1, which means that they're less likely to be able to sell things. You get to set up your initial starting prices. You start with a couple of each type of weed, and I think it's 2 of each, and some bongs and some edibles. As you go through your turns playing, you basically have, at the beginning of the game, your worker and a grow card. You're able to buy more workers, but you're not able to increase the speed of growing through getting more grow cards. There is a way of doing it, which is using magical fertilizer, which apparently is illegal. Who knows what it means, but some kind of techniques that maybe make it not so healthy, but speed up the growth of the product that you're creating. Now, there's a number of different things that you're able to have in the game, and some of them are more valuable than others. Workers essentially give you actions. Each game turn, you have a number of actions equal to the number of workers you have plus 1 for your grow card, essentially. But it's not. It just gets mixed in with the actions in terms of when you get to choose to play it. But it can only do one thing. Whereas your workers have a bunch of stuff they can do. Advertisements, which are going to increase the desirability of going to your store. Different strains of weed. Whoever has the most strains has an advantage in terms of where customers are going to go. The location is a very important, perhaps the most important, but not by a hell of a lot, of those determinants. When somebody decides they want the cheapest weed, they're going to go to the place with the cheapest supply of what they want. But within that, they're going to choose either best location, most strains, or by the advertising. Excuse me. You have a couple kind of wild cards, which are the Whiffed and Goober, which basically allow you to say, somebody's looking for weed, but I paid off the driver to take them to my store for the type that they're looking for. And that's kind of an interesting thing because they will pay top dollar. Whatever price you're charging as your lowest price for the quality that they're looking for. And there's 3 qualities, yellow, green, and red in that order, yellow being the worst. Technically not necessarily. It's the cheapest to wholesale to grow. It's the fastest to grow and the cheapest to grow. But you could set it at any price you like. And if you're the only person who has a yellow weed, you could set it all the way up at the top shelf $600. Of course, in the particular case of yellow, if you set that at $500 or $600, one of these other cards gets to come into play. There are security guards whom you can hire. What they're going to do is reduce the effects of a criminal if a criminal visits your shop. What I found with interactions was that if you had a good location, 3 of the locations have the capacity on your turn, if you draw a counter, you can say, I don't want that counter, I want another one. And they get more and more improved, which allows you to avoid criminals. Kind of makes sense. A better neighborhood criminals don't go to. It also allows you to avoid investigations, which seems a little fuzzier. Investigations happen when you undertake an illegal action. Well, when you have illegal cards in your stock, and the investigations can be somewhat mitigated by having a lawyer. They might be able to cancel it out completely. They might not. The problem with police and lawyers is that you have to pay them up front. The lawyer you have to pay when you use him, and then he gets discarded. The police or your security guards, you have to pay wages to, just like you do your workers. You have some special cards. The rip-off card, if somebody tries to sell yellow weed at a $500 or $600, somebody can take an action to put this on you. And then your location is less valuable. And remember, location may be the most important of the three, but not by a hell of a lot. There's a review which can come up from a random event, and that just gives you some additional advertising if you win that. You win that by having the most top quality red and the most strains. And there's tiebreakers within that. And finally, there's the Blaze Cup, which comes out on just before the last turn of the game, and gives you it's judged in the same way as the review is, and it gives you a couple of extra strains plus the advertising that the review would give you. So anyway, on your turn, each time you get a turn, each time it comes around on the turn, each time it comes around and you get around an action, whatever. If you have any cards that have not acted yet, you pick one of them and flip it over. If it's a worker, they can do one of a bunch of different things. Kind of like worker placement, more like action selection, but none of it is like you do something, you don't prevent anybody else from doing that same thing. And in fact, you might be encouraging them. One is the grow card, which allows all your plants to advance one level, and if they hit one of these, you can pay to harvest the plants, and you get a couple. The worker actions are a whole bunch. So you can move to a new location or add a location. You can put a grow warehouse up for auction. This is a really hard one because it's a very, very powerful capability. And they cost you $100 in rent every time rent and wages comes around. In between turns, there's these rent and wages. So here you've got 4 turns of rent and wages, 3 turns, and then another rent and wages, 3 more turns, and then the end of the game with a rent and wages. And basically, what you have to do is you have to pay each of your workers, each of your security guards, you have to pay your advertising if you want to keep it. This is where things are kind of fuzzy. Security guards, for example, with the rules as written, you would never actually fire them, you just wouldn't pay them, which feels a little cheap, so I kind of modified that. But one of the actions you have is that you can fire security guards. What else costs you? The warehouses cost you. That's about it. Your locations, but yeah. We went over that already. Anyway, when you put the grow warehouse up for auction, whoever wants to bid the most gets it. Now, you have first shot at bidding, so if you have an idea of how cash-strapped people are, you might be able to get away with ensuring that you get it. But it becomes pretty questionable because you're using one of your limited actions to put something up that you may not even get. However, it is very powerful to have grow warehouses. And in fact, the person who had a bunch from the beginning, well, early on, the person who had managed to win one that somebody else triggered by their action, ended up winning the game by a lot. And I feel like that was a significant part of what they did. You're also able to go to the wholesale market. and buy goods at fairly high prices. Now, edibles and bongs only cost $100 each. So that's pretty cheap, especially if other people don't have them, because you can mark them up to $600 in that case, and you'll be the one who sells them. The different maturity of weed. $200 for one yellow. It costs $100 to harvest 2 yellow. So that's a high price. And similarly with the others, $300 for one green, $400 for one red. However, when you're growing your own, you're limited by where your seeds are on the grow track. And you may only have one seed if you have only one grow thing. So you don't have a high influx of weed to put in your shelves, which means that sometimes it's a very, very good idea to pay those high prices, especially if nobody else has that color for the maturity. In addition to everything else for rent and wages, there's this cost of living, which just is an increase to how much you have to pay that turn. It's a simple addition to that. At the same time as you flip over a worker to buy wholesale, you can cut deals with other players. I didn't do this at all. I don't believe it's a winning strategy to say go after growing stuff and selling it to other players. And other players holding stuff means you don't have a monopoly. And when you have a monopoly, you have very, very powerful capabilities. So if you outgrow the other players, you might be able to set the price on things in a way that you wouldn't be able to in a more competitive market, which makes it feel really, really iffy to ever want to sell your excess product. Now, there may be a condition where you have too much and somebody else has too little, and you're willing to cut a deal. But remember, you almost assuredly have to be asking less than the cost of the wholesale market, because they can just turn to that and leave you with your overstocking unless they have unless there's something really weird going on in terms of a deal. I could see some kind of deal going on where people are trying to ensure that both players have monopolies to keep things going. That might be a possibility. You can hire a new worker. You flip over your current worker, you pay the wages, $100 for a worker, and get another one who's also been used for the turn already. You don't get another action out of doing this. So it's somewhat less valuable, but I found that early in the game you probably want to have at least one extra worker, maybe a couple, whatever. Depends on the circumstances and whatnot, because you can find yourself with too many actions. I forgot to tell you something, but we'll get to that in a moment. You can also fire a worker. You flip the worker over, and you can either ditch that worker or ditch another one. Now, I could see a situation where you wanted to ditch a worker who has an action you haven't used yet, so that you can go earlier on the next turn, which is kind of a weird little gameplay mechanism. I didn't do that ever, even if it seemed like a wise idea. You can also flip a worker over and just ditch him, but you always have to keep one. You can buy advertising. You're going to have to pay that every time that the rent and wages comes around, or else you can ditch it. At that point, there's no get rid of advertising action. So if you don't pay for it, it goes away during rent and wages. No matter what, I don't see trying to fix that. You can buy strains. Well, you buy a strain. Again, you flip the worker over, you pay $100, and you get one of the strain cards, and it's one of the things that determines where people go. Same with advertising. You can influence the Wift or Goober driver. You pay him cash, and he will help you at some point when you flip him in. You can hire a security guard. They seem like kind of a bum deal. When you get robbed, you get robbed. Your security guard charges you a flat amount right up when you hire him, and then in the rent and wages, just like a worker would. But he just sort of reduces the amount of money you lose. He does. It's not like you catch the thief. There are, when you get a thieving event, you're going to lose some money almost certainly, unless you have been spending a lot on guards. So they seem like kind of a bum deal to me. I bought one to protect the first player. You can flip over to declare a ripoff if somebody qualifies for that, if they have yellow weed at the $500 or $600 level. In the advanced game rules, it adds retaining a lawyer and conducting illegal actions. Now, retaining a lawyer, grabbing a cop, a security guard, or conducting illegal actions generally means you draw 3 cards off the top, pick one or not. You can just discard them all, discard the rest, and take the effect of that card. Now, in terms of a lawyer, you pay him his retainer, and he sticks around until you need him. A security guard, you pay him his wage price, and he will charge you wages from then on, unless you fire him. And conduct illegal actions, you get an action out of it, a thing that you can do out of this. Instead of grabbing an illegal action card, you could instead pull the illegal fertilizer, which gives your workers an additional action that they can do. They can flip over, pay $100, and give you an extra grow phase, including cutting and whatnot. Okay, but that's what the workers can do. Before you take your actions, you actually have to draw from a cup one of these random chits, which generally contain customers and some other events and stuff that happen, like the criminal or like an investigation. There's a random events table that one triggers as well to give you less likely events. Most turns, each time you're going to take an action, before you take the action, you draw 1 chit. But there are a fair number of turns where you get 2, and there's also chits in the cup that generate more actions. And this is one of the things that got me kind of confused, along with flipping the cards over. The cards actually don't look different enough. So here, he's got an action, and he's got his wages up here. On this side, it says worked, and he doesn't have his wages. That's the only difference on those. The grow card, I can show you one of them. It says grow on one side, and it says growed on the other, with a slightly different picture. I found the coloration, and I found that tripped me up. Let's just put it that way. Okay. And then at the end of your turn, and this is a really key thing, you can shift the prices of all your goods. Now, a lot of the customers are just looking for the cheapest product they can get for what they want. And what that means is, if other people have lower prices than you, you are not going to sell to that customer. Some of the chits say whoever drew the chit is the one they're going to that store. They're going to try to buy the product they want. And if they don't get the product they want at that store, they go to the next store down the line. So there's no cheapest price. They don't care about price, and they don't care about any of the other factors that are tiebreakers on price. So what you end up having is a lot of people dropping their prices. Now, at some point or another, it's not economically viable to keep dropping your prices. And there's a floor, $100. Now, some people have advantages, and they can drop their price to match someone else, but like location, advertising, or strains, which are the tiebreakers here. And they can be pretty certain that they're going to succeed in getting at least some of those customers. And you might have more than one of those advantages. You might have it set so that you automatically will get any lowest price customers as long as no one's lower than you. What this all means is that people have a freedom to set their price wherever they want. They're not going to sell very much weed if they're above anyone else, or if their store is less attractive for various reasons than everyone else. And it creates this interesting mechanism or circumstance. The mechanism creates the circumstance where you have the first player go. They look at the situation and say, somebody's beating me on price. I have to set it up so that I can sell some product if chits come out. And they try to arrange their prices and their store configuration in such a way that they're guaranteed to sell at least some on some chits, right? That they didn't draw. But then the next player goes, and they have that same kind of decision tree of how do I kind of make sure that I sell my product at the highest price that I can get with some likelihood. And if I have too much of a quantity, it may just behoove me, not to worry about a third of the time I get to sell it and say, look, I want to have a price that's lower than everyone else just to make sure that I always sell it if you don't have all the advantages or whatever. That created what I would say is almost a pathological situation in the game that I played, where each player basically trumped the player before them in that first turn. And I think that is actually a natural occurrence in the game. That first turn, you're going to see each player basically set themselves up in such a way. Now, they might not all do what my players did, which was rely on location first. There are certain special advantages to location, though, namely the redraws on these, which make you safer from thieves and investigations than police or anything can do, in addition to making your store more attractive. But anyway, what I ended up seeing was this really almost mechanistic, first player went and said, here's what I want to do. I want to set my prices here, and I want to do X because whatever. And then the second player looks at the first player's tableau and says, I have to beat that, and that means I will beat that for the next 3 counter draw, next 3 action phase draws. And those might be double draws or whatever. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Another interesting facet is that no counters are drawn if you have no actions available. So let's say you have just the 2 basic actions and you use them up and everybody else has like 4 actions or something. Well, when it comes to your turn, you don't draw a counter, and that's an actual disadvantage because some of the it might be an advantage for some things. You don't get thieved, you don't get investigated, but some of the counters are just walk into your store and buy your product. And what that means is if you're kind of lower on workers, you gotta count on selling your goods on the lowest market thing. Anyhow, it created a really intriguing dynamic, which I compared a fair amount during play to games like Business Strategy and Executive Decision, which use the same model as the Star Trader, the SPI one. Although Star Trader, you have to actually move the goods around, so it's the most complex of them. Executive Decision is the simplest of them. Business Strategy is something different. And as well as to games like Silverton, where you have to deliver goods, but you want to kind of hold off until the price, until the demand gets high enough that it's desirable. The games like Business Strategy, you put a bid in for what price you're willing to pay, accept whatever, depending on if you're buying or selling. And then whoever put the best bid gets as much as they want of that out of the supply. And then the next best bid gets the next pile out of the supply and stuff like that. And of course, you could add complexity to that kind of system where you have contracts instead of bids and stuff like that, where you can assure yourself products in that kind of system design. But I've never seen a system design like this. Now, maybe there's something else out there, but I'm not aware of it, where essentially each player gets on their turn to set the prices, and thus you have this continuous competitive cycle. It's interesting. I don't think it's entirely realistic, because the thing is, one store sets its price lower. If you find out about that and it's affecting your customer base, it's going to affect your customer base. You're just going to set your price lower too. It doesn't take waiting a significant amount of time to see the effects of that. But on the other hand, if the time scale were smaller, then it feels like it should be. I mean, you're moving your business to different places, you're growing wheat, all kind of stuff like that, that indicates a certain time frame. If you're talking about changes, I cut my prices in half, you might not notice that for a few days. And then you start noticing, a lot of customers aren't coming in. What's up with that? And stuff like that. It does actually do a neat job of price plus advertising generates a certain synergy. Like you put an ad in half off. Wow, that will really attract people. You don't actually do that in the game, but if you lower your price and have the advertising capability, you're more effective. Same thing with visibility. If you're in a better location and you have that half off sign in your store, it's more likely to draw people in. A little less obvious is the strains. Now, there's a limited number of advertisements and strains. There's a limited amount of everything. You can, once they're all out, you can pay more money. In the case of advertisement and strains, you pay $200 instead of $100, and you can take one from somebody else. You don't pay the person you're taking it from, you pay the bank, and you're just paying a higher price. But what that means is a potential of a 2-point swing in those desirability functions. Like I said, I found certain aspects of the game to be difficult for my brain now. Now, I don't know if I'm getting stupider. I think I may be. Or, well, it's probably both. I was going to say. In addition to, whatever might be impacting me where I can't keep track of as much as well as I used to be able to, there is a lot going on. When you draw an action chit, let's say it's a turn that has 2 action chits in it, and you have 2 repicks, and then you draw an action chit that gives you 3 actions to replace the one that you just drew. So now you spent 1, you're +3, you had 2, so you're at 4 actions with 2 redraws. You have to keep track of all that kind of stuff. In addition, the visuals on the cards, when they said worked or not worked, it was kind of busy. It didn't help that I'm playing it, solo for 4 players, trying to keep track of all of that. I caught myself actually, for the most part, the worst thing I did was doing, I don't know, there were a few things. I didn't necessarily catch the proper expenditures for everyone all the time. And I also got myself in situations where maybe I didn't flip over the card for work and whatnot. So if you look at my playthrough, you'll see I have some situations where things got kind of problematic. One thing that I saw in my play was that the one player who went in a different direction from everyone else and really kind of didn't expend anything on trying to make other people, trying to make customers come to his shop and didn't really get into that competition too heavily, ended up winning by a lot. On the other hand, they got the advantage of a relatively cheap warehouse. And I'm not sure how much the cost really mattered. It was more a matter of, I mean, obviously, if they paid way too much, they'd be screwed. But the fact that they got it maybe too cheap because I didn't really know what I was doing for it at that early point in the game, that was a huge. The fact that they got the extra warehouse at a reasonable price or better. The or better means what did they do? They saved a few $100 early on. Yeah, that can snowball or whatever. But they also relied heavily on the wholesale and then just undercutting prices and maybe getting lucky, you know. By relying on wholesale to get your weed in the shelves, it gives you a reason to go into the wholesale market, which allows you to buy bongs and edibles, which are very cheap, and if you dominate the market in them, you could make huge amounts of money off of them. So yeah, it was kind of an interesting thing. If two players had gone in that direction, it wouldn't have been a dominant strategy. I think the only reason it was so powerful was the fact that all three other players were kind of fighting over the customers coming into their store, and this one player was fighting over, decided kind of accidentally to dominate production. There's the possibility, like I said, of selling weed to other players, but I don't see that as being terribly economically feasible. It's not like you can ditch your storefront and not have workers. You have to have a location and you have to have a worker, which means that you have the capacity to sell and you're paying some money for that. So you probably want to play in that game. And other people are going to be going to the wholesale in order to have any access to the goods that you'd want to sell. Which again, you know, it would be a pretty odd situation, I think, for someone to sell unless they have an overstocking. And even if they have an overstocking, they probably want close to what the wholesale is charging. They don't want to just get rid of product. It doesn't hurt them. I found this an interesting little model, and you know, like I said, that price setting mechanism is different from anything that I've seen, and the way it worked out in this was just really kind of eye-opening. You know, again, not necessarily all that accurate to what the time frame is, etc. But interesting, and created some very interesting gameplay. All right, let's send it up.